The peace in Iran is over before it really begun. Trump was almost assassinated. There isn't a week where there isn't something crazy happening. We talk about it. We talk about the implications for the market in this week's episode, episode number 26 of my investment journey. Half a year of doing this, which in and of itself makes me kind of proud. But before we get into it, let's do what we always do and make the trade, which is, as always, a 1,000 euro investment in the MSCI emerging markets. Let's go ahead. Let's put in 1,000 euros. Go ahead and boom, there we go. Perfect. We are at 28,450-ish. After 26 weeks, that means we're up about 2.5K. Beautiful result, nothing to add. For full transparency, Friday, when I usually make my trade, the markets are closed, so I'm doing this 2 days earlier due to a scheduling conflict. But by the time I record the rest of this video, it will already be Saturday and we'll have a full perspective on the week. So let's look at the markets, and this week has been a good week again. Most markets reached an all-time high. You see that the MSCI World is up and the MSCI Emerging Markets as well. And the way this is summarized is that stocks largely shrugged off the conflicting headlines about the war in the Middle East and a surprisingly hawkish Federal Reserve policy meeting. So major central banks seem to keep the rates steady. What will happen here remains to be seen, but April was the best monthly performance of the S&P 500 since November 2020. So we're living in a paradoxical time when there is the war going on. Macroeconomic impacts should be huge, but somehow the stock markets are rising. And yeah, tensions are rising also. There was another attempt on Trump's life here. So when he was at this correspondence dinner, there was an armed man, rushing in, trying to assassinate him. So nothing happened there, but, people are going crazy once again. So what's going on? Yeah, Trump's approval rating is in the toilet. It's reaching Iraq and Vietnam era disapproval levels. And this, of course, has to do with the Iran war. And so here you can see a poll, what Americans think about the war. 36% say it was the right decision, 61% say it was a mistake. And this is, of course, completely skewed along party lines. Among Democrats, 91% think it was a mistake. Among Republicans, 79% think it was the right decision. But the tiebreaker, of course, are the independents. And here, 71% say it was a mistake. Maybe that's one of the reasons why Trump declares hostilities with Iran have been terminated. Now, it's funny how he has already ended this war 15 times and declared victory, but this probably also has to do with a legal situation, which is the War Powers Act, and it says the president must seek congressional approval for military hostilities that last longer than 60 days. And so here it says by declaring that the hostilities are over, he is resetting the clock. While he, of course, did not rule out future military action. So it's kind of like a dance around the legal situation and to circumvent the checks and balances provided by the Congress's oversight over the president. And so whether you think the war was a good idea or not, it is definitely something that is felt by American consumers, as you can see here in the fuel prices. I've shown these charts a couple of times already, where a year ago we saw prices of $3.20 per gallon, and that jumped to over $4 when the war started. And by now, gas prices exceed $4.40 per gallon, so another 10% over the last month. And as long as Donald Trump doesn't enforce export controls on US oil, the US are exposed to the global oil market. And here you can see the price continues to stay incredibly high. So we're at $108 right now, well above $100. And this will not resolve as long as the Iran situation is not resolved. Now, in another big move, the United Arab Emirates is quitting the OPEC oil cartel after nearly 60 years. What is OPEC? OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, formed in the 1960s by those countries in dark purple, and their role is basically to stabilize the oil price globally. They're literally a cartel. If every country were to act in an uncoordinated fashion, the incentive, of course, would be to maximize oil exports. That would increase the supply globally and lower prices. And standard economic theory would suggest that every country would do that, of course. And if you just think of it in a game theory setting, all the countries would achieve suboptimal outcomes. So OPEC imposes a quota on all the countries, which means they need to curtail their exports and thereby keeping the market supply in check and the prices at a certain level. At the same time, you don't want oil prices to be as high as possible because that, of course, will make oil fields profitable in other countries that may come online and increase the global supply again. And it would accelerate the switch to renewable energy in a lot of countries. So the goal of OPEC is really to maximize long-term revenue of these oil exporting countries. And in the past, OPEC has played a huge role. In recent times, OPEC isn't as important anymore. You can see the dark red area of the chart represents OPEC countries and the rest is all the other countries. But what's behind all this is primarily a deepening rift between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Here you can see Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the leader of the UAE, and he already in the past said, we don't want to cut production. For example, here in a headline from 2023. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, is the clear leader of the cartel, and they call the shots. But now it seems that the UAE have decided that the drawbacks of the OPEC membership outweigh the benefits. Now, as you can see, Saudi Arabia is by far the biggest producer, and the UAE is in 4th position here. So the UAE currently produce 3.1 million barrels of oil per day, but they could increase production by another 1 million barrels daily. When we look at the exports only, we see that actually the UAE is in 3rd position, but again, Saudi Arabia is number 1. And here's the tricky part now. The UAE suffers from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. They don't get their oil out properly or as much as they want to. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, can export most of their oil via the Red Sea. So the East-West pipeline is now back to full capacity of 7 million barrels per day. And as you can see, 7 million barrels is about as much or even more than Saudi Arabia exports. So they can in fact put all their oil on the market at the currently crazy high prices. And that helps Saudi Arabia massively because they have a huge budget deficit. In 2025, the shortfall is 5.5% of GDP. That's massive. But if the oil prices stay elevated, they can repair their budget. Here you can see the break-even fiscal oil price for Saudi Arabia, and that is about $90 per barrel. So if the oil price stays at or above the $90 mark, they will close their fiscal deficit. Meanwhile, the UAE have a budget surplus of more than 5% currently. And on top of that, they have a break-even fiscal oil price of around $50. So if they were not constrained by their OPEC quota, they could put more oil on the market, make more money. It wouldn't do too much to the global oil prices, and they could just make more money. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia can be kind of content with the current closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and if some oil production capacities get bombed and taken offline, or the strait is closed for even longer, oil prices may stay elevated, which of course helps Saudi Arabia to close their fiscal deficit. And so this is one of the reasons why Saudi Arabia and the UAE clash over the oil and the production quotas, which of course is a story that is related to the war in Iran, but it's also its whole separate story altogether. Now, there are, of course, channels that can explain this way better than me, what it means for the oil markets, the stability of the region, the increasingly closer ties between the UAE and the US, and everything related to that. In any other year, this would have been the news story of the year in the energy markets. But this year, of course, because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the Iran war, it is not. And I wanted to give you some insights into this story as well, but we'll see what happens. Maybe it does something to the oil prices, maybe it doesn't. I think the one guy who wishes for lower oil prices right now is Donald Trump. The midterms are approaching at lightning speed, and maybe this is what will force Trump's hand ultimately. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I will continue to observe the markets, keep making my investments. Now that we got half a year of this whole thing behind us, let's see if I can maintain this for another 6 months. If you want to keep following this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I see you next week. All the best and take care.